Hello everyone and welcome back to the monthly deck building contest hosted by Archidect.com. I am joined, not as always, we have a special guest host. Olivia's taken the month off, but instead, very special, my host over on the EDH Recast, Dana Roach. Welcome, bud. How's it going?
Good afternoon. I am the Kirkland brand Olivia Gobert Hicks for this show, but I am glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you and to be judging this monthly deck building contest, everyone. Shout out last month's contest winner, Miles Teague, that Mishra Popper deck. Really fun. We're really happy for the winners over there. But this month we have a brand new contest, brand new prompt. And so Dana, what was the prompt that we gave everybody for this month's contest?
This month's theme is to brew a commander legal list that you believe would serve as a good first deck for a new player.
And there's a couple different ways that we can take that too. It was really interesting to see what people did with those prompts. All these finalists, they are vying for some sweet CardSphere credit. The winner will receive $250 on CardSphere. Second place will get $150. Third place, $100. So there's a lot at stake. If you're a user of CardSphere, you haven't checked it out yet, this is a great opportunity to. Just a fantastic site, and it's great credit over there.
To vote for these decks, just go to the deck link in the description and upvote the one that you like the most.
Awesome, yeah. Voting for this month's contest will close on August 28th, so make sure you get your votes in by that date, because voting will close, and then next month's prompt will be released on September 4th. So remember that for next month. And Dana, with all that laid down, why don't you introduce the first deck that we're going to talk about today?
The first finalist here was submitted by user Ethereal, I believe is how you would say it, because there's a lot of threes in place of the letter E in that name, but I'm going to go with Ethereal. It is a deck headed by Dragonlord Ojutai. The strategy seems to be Voltron control, and this is a Azorius, kind of a flyer slash Voltron list.
Yeah, they had some really good mindsets when they went into brewing this deck. They pointed out the philosophy behind this pick was 4 ideas of introductory gameplay: cheap, castable, understandable, and upgradable. And I really like the intentionality that went behind that thought process of how are we going to pick the commander and then the strategy to follow.
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was going into this looking for in decks as well. So it's nice to see that somebody who made the deck was thinking the same things. As for the content of the deck, Ethereal says the idea was to keep the player as safe as possible while requiring as little tough decision making as possible. Cards like Ghostly Prison and other pillow fort effects make it more difficult for your opponents to hit you, and the hardest decision for the player will come in the sizable amount of removal. So, that's a decision you have to make, but it also keeps you safe as well and makes your play experience a little smoother.
Yeah, there's some powerhouse cards in here too. One thing that I did notice about a lot of the submissions that we received throughout this entire contest is a lot was budget focused, and I definitely can appreciate that as kind of a side effect of having something so accessible to newer players. But that doesn't mean you're skimping on power. I know, Dana, you love Blackblade Reforged, which is such an important card for this deck because you're hitting super hard, but also there's fun cards that kind of get you into the multiplayer aspect of playing Commander specifically. I think this is a good deck for people that have a background in Magic but are not necessarily knowledgeable with Commander. So cards like Duelist Heritage is a really good intro to multiplayer politics that is going to help people kind of get adjusted to this new format.
And I think because your commander has hexproof when it's not tapped, and there's a lot of ways in this deck to give it vigilance, that also I think is kind of comforting for a newer player to know that the commander that they are suiting up with things like Blackblade Reforged are much more likely to stick around rather than being removed the first chance your opponents get to remove him.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a commander-centric strategy is fine as long as you can protect them, and that was definitely taken into account too. So there's a lot of really cool ways, but also there's powerful cards in there too. Mask of the Schemer is a card that I always like seeing because you draw a ton of cards. It kind of does a good job at addressing all of the commander-specific problems that a deck needs to address of just resource management, and for being an Azorius deck, this does a real good job of that.
This seems like a very fun intro to learning to play Commander.
Well, the second deck that we come up, I want to introduce this one, Dana. I know I'm stealing your thunder a little bit here by being our guest judge, but it's a Selesnya deck, and I always love talking about Selesnya decks myself. So Jasmine Boreal of the 7 is our second deck that we're going to talk about. This was submitted by user Dracater. I want to say that's how we pronounce it. And this is just all about vanilla creature beats. It's playing creatures that have no abilities because Jasmine Boreal of the 7 has an ability that says creatures you control with no abilities can't be blocked by creatures with abilities.
Again, this is it's a 2-color deck that's got an easy mana base for newer players, so you're almost always going to be able to cast the things that you have in your hand. And because the creatures are all vanilla, there's less lines of text on your cards in play for a newer player to have to worry about. I think that's a real bonus here.
Yeah, I think what Dracater like to point out in their description of the deck is with Jasmine Boreal of the 7 as the commander, the deck contains 19 creatures without abilities. And so total, there's 58 cards without any additional text to read, which brings down the barrier to entry. So we kind of talked about how the last deck was a good deck for players new to Commander. This is a good deck for players that are just new to Magic in general. I think that the barrier on how much you need to understand is significantly lower, but also you're not skimping on power because of Jasmine Boreal of the 7 making those creatures unblockable.
Right, and that actually also kind of works nicely in terms of making things simpler too. There's less decision making that has to happen when I feel like most of your creatures are swinging through unblocked.
And there's some powerful cards in there. Some of the key cards here, I really like Azuri's Predation as a way to make a bunch of 4/4s that are then going to have no abilities, can't be blocked. Maybe you're picking off a lot of the opponent's creatures too. Then there's stuff like Noble Purpose. Noble Purpose is a brilliant addition to this because it's a way to effectively give your creatures lifelink without actually giving them an ability, because it just reads whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, you gain that much life, which means Jasmine Boreal of the 7 kind of benefits from having a bunch of lifelinkers without actually taking away Jasmine Boreal's ability.
There's also a sub-theme in the deck of token generation. And one thing nice about that is all the tokens that it makes are vanilla tokens. So again, they benefit from Jasmine's ability, making them virtually unblockable.
I always love seeing Sandworm Convergence pop up in lists. You don't see that very often.
That was the one I was going to point out as well. Absolutely. I love seeing that card in a deck.
Yeah, it's so much fun. And then you have all these Anthem effects too. Like I said, it's a way to kind of take a lot of the load off of every card does everything, which I think for people who are just getting into Magic, this is a really good way to go about that. Because yeah, it's just a great way to help teach players Magic when Commander may not necessarily be the best way to teach players Magic.
Another interesting card in the deck is Sakiko, Mother of Summer, and it does have an ability, which is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you add that much green mana to your mana pool until end of turn. So while that wouldn't benefit from Jasmine's ability, all your other creatures that are kind of unblockable do benefit, so they will make you additional mana to use in your second main phase after you swing through with all these unblockable vanilla creatures in your attack step.
Yeah, Sakiko is kind of like that Noble Purpose type of card here. You're kind of giving your creatures abilities without actually giving it to them, so it's a good way to navigate that kind of balance that you need to, and it's a good teaching point that isn't too complicated for newer players, so I really do like that too. So with that said, Dana, we got one more deck. What is that one that we're talking about today?
The last deck we have here is Lathliss Dragon Queen. So we have a commander here from one of the most popular kindred types in the game, dragons, and it's a deck that's playing a bunch of dragons and making dragon tokens, which I think is very attractive to a newer player.
Yeah, it's just dragons and more dragons. And I said I love Selesnya decks, but also who doesn't love dragons? If you have somebody getting new into Magic just in general, they're going to know what dragons are. Dragons is something, I mean, you watched House of the Dragons, and you're probably going to play Lathliss Dragon Queen too.
Yeah, and what's nice about this, I mean, tokens can be a little bit complicated to manage sometimes, but in this deck where you're basically just making one type of token, which is 5/5 dragons, and you're not dealing with complicated doubling effects like you sometimes deal with in green, I think for a newer player, this is a pretty straightforward way to deal with like a first token deck.
Oh yeah, and user Antzor, who submitted this deck, they had a really good breakdown of how intentional they were, which again, I very much appreciate. The complexity is a piece that they kept in mind. There's no shuffling or search effects, and there's draw effects with no downsides, which sometimes can be harder for new players to really wrap their heads around. But mechanical opportunities too. There's a few triggered abilities, but it's mostly about the same thing happening. It's like when creatures enter the battlefield, you're gonna have stuff like Warstorm Surge do something. And it's such an accessible deck with a common line that just, even if you don't play Magic, you don't play video games to begin with, people still know what dragons are. They can have that through line of, I understand what this is trying to do.
And one thing nice about this too, as useful as Lathliss is to have her out there making you dragon tokens, this also is the kind of deck where if your commander, is removed several times because your deck is just filled with like big beater dragons, you can probably still have win conditions and still like be competitive in the game, if your commander's gone. And I think for a newer player, that's a really useful thing to have in a deck as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I know that the value of eventually you're just going to get to 6 and 7 lands in play, and you're just going to start casting 6 and 7 mana creatures, which eventually sometimes it just gets there. You don't have to worry about being super reliant on your commander. It helps, but also just there's a lot of things going on there, like Dragon Speaker Shaman. It kind of teaches the value of, yes, you have a deck specifically revolving around one creature type, but sometimes it's okay to venture out of that for such a huge upside like Dragon Speaker Shaman gives you with the cost reduction built in there. So there's a lot of different ways that you're teaching players about here's how you can get to big mana spells without having a lot of lands in play.
I also really like that this is a monocolor deck. That just means the land base is so much easier for a new player to navigate.
Yep.
Like, if you wanted, you could just play this deck with, 36 basics and you would just never have a problem. And for a new player, that's both budget friendly and just really, really easy on the brain.
Yeah. I really like all 3 of our submissions. All of our finalists, users, like, once again, all these submissions were great. Like, it was very hard to pick just 3 finalists. I wish we could have picked more, but unfortunately, we only have 3 finalist slots to give out. So yeah, nice job to everybody out there who submitted decks, and we appreciate all the support.
If you want to vote, you can just go to the decks by following the links we'll have here in the show notes and upvote those particular lists, whichever one you like the most. And voting for this contest will carry on through August 28th. So you'll have 1 week to vote for whichever one of these decks catches your fancy as your favorite Commander legal list for a first deck for a new player.
Yep, so make sure everybody out there check out these lists, upvote the one that you like the most, and you help control who wins that grand prize of $250 in Card Sphere credits. So with that said, Dana, thanks for joining. Thanks for filling in this month. I definitely appreciate it. It's always fun to get to hang out and chat. But if anybody wants to check out more of your content, where can people do that, and where can they find you on social media?
You can find me online in most places at Dana Roach, and I'm writing articles for EDH Rec and Commander's Herald. And you can find me with Matt and with Joey Schultz at the EDH Recast.
Yep, you find you pretty much every week on this very channel. So
Absolutely.
If you like more of Dana's content, you don't have to go that far. As far as me, you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you get your votes in by next week. And until then, we will see you next month, and happy brewing.